A few years ago, working in a therapeutic setting and witnessing systemic family constellations, I encountered a moment that continues to stay with me. A moment that stops you dead in your tracks. When a person connects with the deep, unexpressed pain of an ancestor, someone who suffered in silence, perhaps someone who carried an unspeakable secret, or perhaps someone who was exiled, or forgotten, or crushed by a tragedy, there is a critical turning point in the healing process. And under the guidance of the therapist, the individual turns towards that shadow, towards that forgotten figure, and speaks a few simple, earth-shattering words. I see you. I see you. If you have ever been in a room when those words are spoken, you can feel the air in the room shift. The heavy, suffocating weight of a family secret lifts. The invisible burden of shame or trauma begins to dissolve. Why? Because the deepest pain an ancestor or any human being can endure is invisibility. Think about it. Why do we have to say, I see you? Why do we have to say, I see you today? Because somewhere down the line, someone didn't see them. Someone looked away out of fear, out of shame, or out of survival. A generational curse, what we call in our tradition, eklala, is very often nothing more than an ancient pain that no one was willing to look at. It is the unmourned grief passed down silently from generation to generation, simply because it was kept in the dark. It is fascinating how this phrase was permeated our cultural consciousness. Recently, watching popular media like James Cameron's Avatar movie, I was struck by something simple yet profound. In that world, the Avatar world, when characters meet, they don't say just hello or shalom. They look deep into each other's eyes and say, I see you. And it isn't a casual greeting. It is an existential acknowledgement. It means I recognize your essence. I recognize your soul, your neshume. I recognize your vulnerability and your rightful place in this universe. We smile when we watch this in the movies, but it touches a raw nerve inside all of us because we know what is the opposite: to be ignored, to be looked through rather than looked at. It's a form of slow erasure. And this brings us straight to the heart of this week's Torah portion, Parashat Re'eh. The parasha opens with Moses standing before the people of Israel, delivering his final urgent address, just as they are about to cross the Jordan in the promised land. And he doesn't begin with a rule book, a legal code, or a theological demand. He begins with a single electric verb, re'eh. Look, see, behold. Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. For generations, commentators, rabbis, sages have debated the mechanics of this blessing and curse thing. But when we looked at it through the lens of human relationships and emotional truth, Moshe Rabbeinu, is teaching us something radical. The blessing and the curse are not arbitrary decrees handed down from the sky. They are the natural consequences of our capacity or our failure to see others. So what is the curse? What is the klala of the Parashat Re'eh? It is existential blindness. It is the moment a society, a community, or an individual decides to look away. It is closing our eyes to the reality of the vulnerable, ignoring the injustice around us, and retreating into our own insulated Bibles, our insulated bubbles. When a society treats human beings as invisible, systemic collapse inevitable follows. That is the true curse. And on the other hand, what is the blessing? What is the bracha of Parashat Re'eh? It is the courage to open our eyes. It is the active, deliberate choice to witness the reality of the world and the people around us. And remarkably, the Torah pivots immediately from this grand metaphysical choice down to the gritty, practical realities of human society. Because in the very next chapters in the parasha, Re'eh details the loss of tzedakah, of charity, to make justice, the fair treatment of the servant, the protection of the widow, the protection of the orphan, and the protection of the stranger. And listen to the language that the Torah uses for these verses. I quote, If there is any needy person among you, do not harden your heart and do not shut your hand against your needy brother. Close quote. The Torah beautifully is telling us that poverty and cruelty are sustained because we harden our hearts and close our hands. In other words, we make the poor invisible. We look away. The antidote to societal breakdown is the exact same antidote used in the therapist's office that I witnessed. Breaking the cycle of blindness by finally choosing to see. And this brings all of us to a quiet, uncomfortable, but deeply necessary question for us today. If the pain of our past and the fractures in our society stem from the fact that someone or somewhere refused to look, how many people in our own lives are we currently refusing to see? Let that question sit with you just for a moment. Think about our daily lives. How often do we walk past our own family members, our spouses, our children, or our aging parents, interacting with them in autopilot without truly seeing the quiet exhaustion, the unspoken anxiety, or the silent heartbreak they might be carrying? How often do we render our colleagues, our neighbors, or the strangers we pass on the street completely invisible? And perhaps most difficult of all, how often do we refuse to look in the mirror and see our own selves? How many parts of our own history, our own mistakes, or our own inner wounds do we sweep under the rug because it hurts too much to turn our gaze towards them? And it is not an accident, and it's not a coincidence in our calendar that we are reading Parashat Re'eh right at the exact moment. Because when Shabbat ends, a few days from Shabbat, we stand on the sacred threshold. With this week, we welcome Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Elul, the last month before Rosh Hashanah. It's the beginning of the Hebrew month that initiates our spiritual countdown towards Rosh Hashanah. And for generations, our tradition has understood the month of Elul as a time to deep return in Teshuvah. But how often do we misunderstand the word Teshuvah and the understanding of what Teshuvah is as a season of harsh self-judgment, or beating our chests over every failure, or standing trial before a strict heavenly judge? The portion of our week, Re'eh, to see, and the wisdom of the I see you, flip that entire narrative on its head. Elul is not a time to judge ourselves with cruelty. It is not. Elul is the time to finally see ourselves with honesty. The month of Elul whispers the acrostic found in the Song of Songs. Elul is written with 4 letters. Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. Ani ledodi vedodi li. I am for my beloved, and my beloved is mine. But to be in a loving relationship, whether it's with God or with our tradition, with our community, or with our own selves, we first have to step out of the shadows of denial. We have to take off the blinders. But we have to ask ourselves an even harder question. When we choose not to see someone, when we look away, turn a blind eye, or pretend someone's pain doesn't exist, what do you think is actually happening? I'll tell you what psychology says. They tell us that the things we most intensely avoid seeing in others are often the very things we are terrified to face within ourselves. The other person becomes a mirror. When we refuse to look at the vulnerability of our neighborhood, or the quiet struggle of our family member, it is because deep down their pain triggers our own hidden fears, our own unhealed guilt, our own suppressed frailties. We don't want to see them because we are afraid of what seeing them will force us to recognize in the mirror. So therefore, my friends, Parashat Re'eh, the portion of our week, to command to see, to look, behold, is ultimately an invitation to radical self-honesty. To truly see another person requires first, having the courage to look into the mirror of our own soul without judgment. So as we cross the threshold into Elul, the last month, the spiritual month of return, let us take this parasha, Re'eh, to see as our personal and communal marching order. Let us have the courage to look back at our personal and ancestral histories, to bring light to the unheld and unhealed places, and gently say to our past, I see you. I see you. You belong to my story. And I release you. Let us look outwards into our families and communities, refusing to let the people around us walk through life invisible. Let us look at the struggling, the lonely, and the vulnerable, and communicate through our presence and our actions. I see you. You matter to me. And above all, let us look inward. Because let's face it, when we really think about it, choosing the blessing in Re'eh, to see, is not a separate act from choosing life. To see the other, to break the cycle of blindness, to refuse indifference and open our hearts, that is choosing life. Even though we are still a few weeks away from reading Parashat Nitzavim, one of the last parashiot portions in the year, the message is already written in our souls. Moses tells the people of Israel, and you shall choose life. Ubacharta b'chaim, because choosing life and choosing to see is choosing to live. May this Elul be the moment we open our eyes, take a deep breath, and bring this truth into song. Shabbat Shalom. And I don't think it was by coincidence that a year ago I was sitting in a coffee shop with my wife Marcela, who's sitting over there, and the coffee shop had a guitar. And I sat down and I was thinking about this parasha. So I wrote a little something for this parasha, saying exactly the first verse, what I was just talking about. And the refrain says, "Ubacharta v'chaim," and you should choose life. So it's easy because you have to repeat after me. Re, re, Anochi Omer, Anochi Omer, Lifnechem Hayom, Lifnechem Hayom, Bracha, Uklala, Uklala, Lifnechem Hayom, Lifnechem Hayom, Lifnechem Hayom. Together now. Ubacharta v'chaim, Ubacharta v'chaim, למען תחיה אתה ושרך ובחרת בחיים ובחרת בחיים ובחרת בחיים. Together the refrain. ובחרת בחיים ובחרת בחיים ובחרת בחיים למען תחיה אתה ושרך ובחרת בחיים ובחרת בחיים ובחרת בחיים. And you shall choose life, because choosing to see is choosing to live.